Hello everyone. It's Rosie here. Back with another Thursday live. And all right. Oh, great. My iPad just tells me I'm live. So perfect. How's everyone doing today? Hopefully you're all having a great day. I had to zip to the grocery store, so I got that done, and it is beautiful here in southern Alberta. We've got some gorgeous weather. It's going to warm right up for us. So hopefully wherever you're at, the weather is great for you too. Just going to pull this up on my computer so I can keep track of comments. Hi, Jenny. And whoops, would help if I'm in the right group when I'm trying to see comments. I will not find them. Okay, now I have to Google. Good old Facebook. It's never as straightforward as you think it will be. All right. There we go. I've got you guys up on my computer. Oh, and I'm still in the wrong group. Hi, Adri. Is that how you say your name? Hello, Jennifer. Bear with me, people. All right. I'll get to the right place here sooner or later. All right. Now I'm in the right spot. Or not. Okay. Refresh. And there we go. Awesome. Okay. I already asked how everyone was doing. So we've got a couple people here. I'm going to see if I can share this from my iPad into the paper crafting group. Scroll. Better search. Search is faster. All right. It's funny when you want something to come up, but everything but. All right, there we go. Hi, Carla. Oh, I just did it, Carla. Thanks. I think. We'll see. I don't know. If you don't see it there, if you don't mind sharing it, Carla, I would appreciate it. I think I got it there, but I'm not sure. So we are going to talk about all things embossing today. Starting off with, and hello to anyone that I didn't say hi to. If I didn't notice you popping in, my apologies, but hello. All right. Hi, Jennifer. So, yeah, I have a lot of embossing stuff. I just realized that. So we're going to start with, I think, the embossing that a lot of people are familiar with. Although if you're new to card making, you may not be as familiar with heat embossing, which is, I mean, I never get tired of heat embossing. It is so much fun. What about you guys? Have you done heat embossing before? Do you enjoy heat embossing? So let me just show you kind of what it looks like. And then we'll go over kind of the supplies of, you know, what are the must-haves if you want to do heat embossing, then what are maybe not necessarily must-haves, but are nice to have, and some of the different products surrounding heat embossing. All right. So we'll take a look at these butterflies. So this is metallic embossing powder. So hi, Cynthia. So what you get when you're heat embossing is you can get a lot of shine, glitter. Hello, Melanie. Super nice on. I'll show you some samples later with sentiments as well. But this is kind of what you get with heat embossing. So it's a little bit of a raised area, depending on what stamp you used. And then embossing powder is essentially a plastic powder that we melt. Okay, so what do you need to do embossing other than your stamp? Jennifer, I'm sure you're great at it. It really is fairly, well, there's a few tips along the way. Okay, so let's start with what do you need if you want to start heat embossing other than your stamped image or your stamp. Okay, you're going to want to actually, I'm going to call this a must-have. This is a powder tool. And what this does, this is the Tailored Expressions powder tool. So it applies powder to your paper to remove the static. So it's an anti-static powder tool, so that when you pour your embossing powder on your paper, it's only going to stick to the areas that have wet ink on it. Okay, and I'll demonstrate that in a bit. Here, we'll just kind of go over the supplies first. So like I said, this is the Tailored Expressions one. And then there's also, Ranger has a pouch like this. And let me just see if I can, this isn't quite as powdery as it looks. I can feel it on here, the powder. Yes, yes, thanks, Jenny. Hi, Melanie. If anyone has this, you want to make sure you pull the lid off. Don't twist, because if you twist, you will actually kind of open up. I'll just show you how this works. Okay, so this is where your embossing powder goes. Okay. So I've seen people use cornstarch works. I haven't refilled this yet. I imagine they probably sell refills. Baby powder apparently works. I'm not sure how well, because I haven't tried those two yet, but this thing is great because it is refillable, which you always want. And poof. Oh man. So this is definitely a must-have when you're embossing. Okay, now, because also you're going to need an embossing powder. Okay, so these are two different powders. Just the only difference is the color. This is a rose gold. This is an antique gold. I know, Jennifer, you said you're designed for Emerald Creek. They have lots of different colors of embossing powder as well. This is a blue. That was kind of a collab between Wild Whisper and Emerald Creek, and we'll take a look at how that looks. So this is the powder that we're going to melt when we heat emboss. Okay, and so this powder is going to need something to stick to. So that's where our watermark stamp pad comes in, or a clear embossing ink, which is what this is on my right. Okay, so, and again, I'll demo that shortly. So these are slow drying inks, and you're going to, when you stamp your image, we then coat that image with our embossing powder, and then that's what we heat set with a heat tool. Okay, so just to recap, we're going to need our anti-static powder tool, you're going to need an embossing powder, you're going to need a clear watermark stamp pad, and then I'll go through these two here shortly. You can get black embossing powder. So if you want to stamp sentiments, for example, or you're looking for a black outline, you could use clear embossing ink with a black embossing powder. However, that powder can kind of tend to stick to places you don't want it to stick to on your paper. So what actually works fantastic is using a VersaFine. This is Onyx Black, and this is a pigment ink, or something like the Altenew Obsidian pigment ink. That works well too. And these are slow drying inks, but if you want to have black embossing, use either of these and then just coat your image with clear embossing powder. So that is definitely a must-have. You're going to want a clear embossing powder as well in your stash, because you will use that quite a bit. And I'll also show you a little bit of that after, because we can stamp with really any color of pigment ink and then just coat that pigment ink with clear embossing powder. And now you've got something similar to a colored embossed image. Same as if you used a colored embossing ink. So let's kind of see how this works. I'm just going to set those guys aside. I'm going to bring in my stamp positioning tool, and I dug through my stash and pulled out a stamp, and wouldn't you know, as soon as we go live, aha, he was hiding. So yeah, the Altenew golds are so pretty, Cynthia. So I'm going to use just this butterfly stamp, and this is purely for demonstration purposes. You could use any stamp. You can do this with your clear acrylic stamps. There is no, nothing's off limits. Okay, so because I'm using a red rubber stamp, I'm going to take out my foam pad and just stick my stamp down there. Doesn't matter if it covers the whole paper or not. I'm going to pick that up with the door of my Misty. Okay, and now before I stamp this with the watermark ink with the Versamark, I'm just gonna treat my paper with my powder tool. Okay, and this is vellum that I'm stamping on. Okay, we'll do some on just plain white cardstock, but you can heat emboss over vellum. There's just a little trick I'll show you if you're going to do that so you don't burn your paper. Okay, so let's ink up our image here. And get that impressed. And if I tip it, I can just kind of make out the outline. I'm going to re-ink that stamp again. Now, if I was creating a project, I would probably have my paper right in the corner so that I just know that it's all lined up in the same spot every time I stamp. So I don't know if you can see this. I'll see. Oh, there you go. Can you just see that little faint outline? So that's the watermark ink. Okay. Now you can actually use this ink on colored cardstock, like a dark colored cardstock if you want to create like a tone on tone type of look, and it looks fantastic. You don't even have to heat emboss if you didn't want to. Just let it dry or heat set it. But let's pull in our embossing powder. And just got my scrap piece of paper. So I'm going to go in first with this, what is this called? Blue Island. Okay, and I'm just going to tap that over here. Now, one of the fun things to do with embossing powder, I'm just going to show you this. I'm putting this down first, the blue kind of down on this side first. Okay, actually that's all I'm going to do with the blue. All right, now you do have a little bit of time to work with this because the ink is slow drying. I'm just going to pour that back in my jar, and I have a little bit that's kind of outside the lines there. I'm just going to tap that off. Okay, and now I'm actually going to come in and I'm going to add some rose gold to the rest of this image. So we're kind of jumping right in with a bit of a different technique from just your traditional heat embossing where you're going to heat emboss all in one color. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to go back over this with some rose gold. So I'll catch that upper butterfly and any areas on the blue down here where the powder didn't stick to. But you can use multiple colors of embossing powder on one image if you want it. Okay, so I'm just gonna pour that back in my jar. Second tip, put the lid on your jar when you are finished with your embossing powder. Why do I mention that? Because I actually ruined a watermark ink pad when I knocked my embossing powder over onto this watermark ink pad. So better to be safe. All right. And now your last most essential tool for this technique is a heat embossing gun. Okay, so I've had this one from Stampin' Up! For quite a while. I'm just kind of holding it off camera here just to let it heat up a little bit. So because we're working with this vellum paper, it's quite delicate. I want to make sure my heat tool is nice and hot before I bring it to my paper. All right. So I think that's pretty hot. So now another tip when you're embossing, for example, a delicate piece of paper like this, I'm going to start my heat on the back. And I'm just going to move that back and forth. I think you can see, yeah, there you can see the powder's melting. Okay, so this just helps me not burn my paper from the front side. Okay, and I just keep that moving. Okay, you can see I overheated that top one a little bit, so it bubbled a little bit. But there is the magic of heat embossing. It never gets old. So that's just beautiful. Okay, so that's on vellum. Now you can heat emboss on acetate. I actually looked through my stash. I used to have some heat resistant acetate, but I could not find any, so I think I'm all out. So I did find, I just want to show you, I just took kind of a piece of regular acetate I had. So it is a little bit, it buckled a little bit from the heat. Hello, Holly. But you can heat emboss on top of this. And again, if you find a heat resistant acetate, you can emboss on that. Now, the one thing I wanted to talk about really quick, I know some people have this heated tool or an embossing gun. I have talked to some people who actually use this for heat embossing, so I think it just takes longer to melt the powder. I haven't actually tried it with heat embossing because I have this guy who generates lots of heat and it's done quick. So I always use this guy. So if you don't have an embossing gun, but you want to try heat embossing and you've got this heated tool, by all means, give it a shot. You might as well try it out. It might just take a little bit longer for your powder to melt. Okay. So that's on our vellum on an acetate sheet if you have it. But let's just do some plain embossing on white cardstock. All right, so I've just got a piece of white cardstock here, but let me bring back in my butterflies here. So those are kind of the basic must-haves. Now, what are some extras you can pick up for yourself? Well, we've got an embossing ink pen or a Versa marker. These are fun if you want to add just a little bit of embossing in maybe smaller areas or certain areas. Or let's do, actually, let me just take this out for a second. I'm kind of diverging from my notes here, but I feel this makes sense. Okay, since we're talking about embossing powders, some of you may have these embossing glazes. Okay, and these are an embossing powder as well. These are quite fun because they are, I actually want to show you what it looks like. Let's do these butterflies real quick. This will all tie in together. I know I'm kind of jumping around here, but this will tie in together. I just want to show you. So I've got some Distress Oxide ink here. So we'll kind of do, let's see. I'm going to turn my paper this way so I can do one way and one the other way. Okay, so I just want to show you what this looks like when we, sorry. Hello, Carol. Stamp in, or pardon me, use Distress Oxide to heat emboss. This is not, this is a slow drying ink, so this is an ink that you can use to heat emboss as well. So I'm going to ink up the stamp, and now I just want to show you, remember I was talking earlier that a clear embossing ink, or sorry, clear embossing powder is a really handy powder to have. And now this might be, we'll see, forgot to treat that with my anti-static powder tool. But it may not make much of a difference because I'm just going to show you this with clear embossing powder first. Just to show you that you can stamp with any pigment ink or any slow drying ink, like an oxide. And an oxide ink isn't necessarily a pigment ink alone. It's a bit of a combination of inks. Okay. Yes, this is my ginormous container of clear embossing powder. I don't know how many jars I bought to fit in here. but it comes in handy when you want to do full sheets like this, or full-size image. Okay, I'm going to set that aside, and before I forget, actually, I'm not going to worry too much about my stamp. Actually, no, I will. I'm going to give this a quick clean here. Now, you do have some time to heat emboss. There's no rush to run and get it done immediately. Just because it is a slow drying ink, it will take a little bit. It won't dry immediately. I just want to try to get most of that off here. May not matter, but okay. So we'll turn on that heat tool. All right. I'm going to kind of hold that up as close to the camera as I can. So you can just see how quickly that powder, that clear embossing powder melts. Okay, there we go. So that's the oxide with the clear embossing powder over top. But let's do this one again. But let's use the watermark pad and the embossing glaze. And then I'll also show you what it looks like when you layer it over top of the Distress Oxide. Just if you happen to have both, then you'll kind of have a good idea how to use them both. Okay, but this time I'm going to, because I'm going to use the embossing glaze, I'm going to make sure I treat that with my anti-static powder tool. All right, I'm going to pop my stamp down. Yeah, the embossing glazes are fun, and there's some really kind of neat things you can do with them as well. So actually, I want to do this with the clear ink first, just so you can see the difference, because we're going to layer. The fun thing to do with these embossing glazes is to layer them over top of colored ink as well. So I just want to show you what that looks like. Okay. Okay, I can see that here. That might be hard for you to see on camera. So now let's come in with our glaze. And this is Salvage Patina, so it's the same color as this, as the oxide ink that I used. All right, let's see if I got a good stamp here. I think I kind of under-inked a little bit, or didn't apply enough pressure in some areas, but that's fine. For demonstration purposes, this works. All right, I'm just going to pour that back into my jar and close the lid. Okay, so I just kind of want you to see the different intensity of color that you get. All right. So it's harder to see that melt, but it is melting. Okay. So you can see the color is a lot more vibrant when we stamp with the oxide ink and clear heat emboss than if we just use watermark ink and then the embossing glaze over top. But it just adds a little bit of a, it's a nice contrast. Just about depends what look you're going for. But let's see what it looks like when we put the glaze over top of the Distress Oxide ink. And then I'm going to show you kind of one of the really fun ways to use this ink, or to use the glaze. I'm just going to give my stamp a little wipe there. I only had clear embossing ink on there, so I'm not too concerned about the stamp or my Distress Oxide pad. Okay. And I always forget to use these embossing glazes until I kind of take them out to play with, or I see somebody else use them. And then I'm like, oh man, I got to use that. Okay. Okay, and again, I forgot to prep that with my anti-static powder tools, so this might be a really good demo on what happens when you don't do that. Okay. So there's my image stamped. Now let me bring in that embossing glaze, and again, I'm using the same color. Now with something like this, actually, why don't we try it since we have this out? Since I've got it out, let's try, I know that this is Distress Oxide ink, but let's try kind of some of this with the matching embossing glaze, and let's see what happens if we use a different color of embossing glaze. Okay, so I'm going to try to get all this 1/2 with the Salvage Patina. Okay, I'm going to tap that off. Okay, actually, that's not bad. Let's see. Okay, so it might be hard to see, but there's a few little areas where the embossing powder is sticking to the white paper there. It's not bad. I could kind of flick most of it off by tapping, but there's still a few spots here and there. That's because I forgot to use that anti-static powder tool first. Okay, so we've got 1/2 of those butterflies coated with our Salvage Patina embossing glaze, so it matches the color of stamp we used. Now let's see what happens when we use a different color. So I'm going to do the other 1/2 with Kitsch Flamingo. And because I've already coated 1/2 that image, I don't have to worry about the embossing powder. Even if I coat the entire image, it's only going to stick to the wet ink. All right. So look at that. I think we're going to get, we'll see if we get a pinky color or a purpley color. All right. Okay. Let me just remove this. Actually, I kind of tapped that off a lot. I'm going to go back over that with a little bit more pink again. I'm not going to tap it off as much. Okay. Let me clean that up. Sorry, if I don't clean this up as I go, it will be a hot mess. Because, like I said, it won't take long for me to knock it on the floor or something like that. Okay. So, hello, Joyce. So we're heating up our tool, and now I'm going to take my heat tool to this. And there we go. All right, so let's bring in our first set of butterflies. Okay, so you get a little bit more of a bright, a little bit more vibrant. So this is the Salvage Patina that's coated with the matching embossing glaze. And then this is the stamped in the Salvage Patina and just coated with clear embossing powder. So this does come up a little bit brighter. And then this left side, we stamped in this color in the Salvage Patina, and then we added some Kitsch Flamingo over top. So you can see that kind of mixes in and gives us a bit of a purpley color, which would make sense because pink and kind of green make purple. Another new rabbit hole. So you can play around with your glazes and layering them over different colors, even different inks. You could stamp this image in a colored ink, and then you could, like a dye ink, for example, and then you could go over top and restamp it if you've got a stamp positioning tool with a watermark ink, and then add your embossing powder and kind of see what you get from there. Okay, so that is kind of a quick little look at the glazes, and then I just want to show you two more things. I was mentioning these Versamarker. So you can get a Versa marker, or this is a embossing ink pen from Lawn Fawn. So they do the same thing, and it's basically, it's this ink in pen form. So if you do calligraphy or scripty handwriting, you could use this and kind of emboss your handwriting. Or some of these, oh, here it is. We have this little butterfly. It's a piece of ephemera from Tim Holtz. I found it in my stash. I don't know where it came from or how long I've had it, but I just wanted to show you how you could take your Versa marker, and I am going to treat this with the anti-static powder tool. I'm just going to show you a couple of sections on here. Okay, so I can take my pen, and you can kind of go right over this area. All right. If I want to add a little bit of color here. And now I can bring in my embossing glaze. Let's see. Kind of gonna pick this fossilized amber just because there's a little bit of yellow on this guy already. Okay, and then I can, so if you have those paper people, those black and white paper people, this is a fun way you can add color to, let's say, a hat or a bow on that black and white image. I might have one here. I'll see if I can find one. So your Versa marker gives you the opportunity, or like an embossing pen, to add just touches of color wherever you want them in specific areas. Okay, so there we go. And it's that fast. Okay, so you can see it leaves that little glossy shine. Yeah, so fun. So this is a fun way if you've got any of these, for example, these people images, you could go in and add color to the hat or a little bit of color somewhere on there. But super fun way to use those. Okay. So I'm just kind of looking at my notes. Oh, okay. Now, we can also use embossing powders, or do embossing on over top of paste. And let me just find, I did this yesterday, but I'll show you how I did that. And we'll even use the glaze. Okay, so if you've got a stencil you love, we're going to use this guy from Simon Hurley. It's the Tiny Circles stencil, and that is actually on sale in the shop. So if you like it, you can find it there. It's a pretty good deal. Okay, so I'm just going to place that anywhere. I just kind of want to show you how this works. And we'll use a mix of embossing glazes for this too. You can use embossing powders as well, any embossing powder. I used the Altenew Antique Gold Metallic on this yesterday when I was kind of playing around with it. So I just wanted you to see what it looked like, but we'll use, okay, and I'm going to use a different molding paste. Not gesso. Let's try this. We're going to use the Ranger Opaque Matte Texture Paste. All right. Let's see. I didn't try this paste yesterday, so we'll see how it works today. So I'm just going to take a little bit, smush that over top. So if you're like doing mixed media or you want to play around with that, this is kind of fun to play around with your paste if you don't get a chance to do that. Oh, thanks, Holly. All right. Let me lift that off. Just going to set that aside. And let's do a couple of different embossing glazes. Let's try, what do we have here? This is Villainous Potion. Just gonna tap that over top. And again, you can do this with an embossing glaze or any color of embossing powder. Well, maybe throw on the rose gold embossing powder on the other side of that, just so you can see the metallic powder. All right, I've got a little bit of purple left on there. I'm just going to shake that in the garbage. Okay, and then we'll do a bit of rose gold, which is kind of my favorite rose gold. This All-to-New one. I think that's in the shop right now too, just to see what the difference is between the two. There we go. Okay, so our embossing powder sticks right to that paste. Okay, and I'm just going to ditch that paper. Probably has a little bit of embossing powder stuck to it, but that's fine. And let's get that heat tool going. Hello, Christy. Hi, Donna. It is a nice fine powder, yeah. Yeah, I really need to play with this more. I'm sure there's a billion other techniques. We're just kind of scratching the surface. All right. So let me get my heat tool on there. And, oh, this is fun. It bubbles up. Hi, Bonita. Okay, so this is our embossing glaze here, and then our just regular metallic embossing powder. So I'm rubbing over top of that. So you can see it just, you get a nice bit of texture, and it doesn't look super melty, but it is dry. I maybe could try it a little bit longer. Let's see. Let's see if it looks more melty in the middle. There we go. Ooh, that's pretty. So yeah, the longer you hold the heat on it, then we're going to kind of get a lot more melty action on that powder. So pretty, so fun to play with. All right. So we've just scratched the surface of embossing with the heat embossing. Now I'm just going to move a few of these things out of the way, and we're going to talk about what I call dry embossing. Okay, so AKA using embossing folders that you use through your die cut machine. And that's another whole more things to buy. I know it feels like that sometimes, doesn't it? All right, I'm just going to set my glazes aside here. Just make a little bit of room. All right, just get these guys out of the way. Okay. Make sure I've got my papers handy. All right, close that. Throw the spoon over here. Okay, just making some room here. And then I'm going to grab my next set of things. All right, so if you are a card maker, you're probably somewhat familiar with embossing folders. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to bring in my lint roller. I actually use this quite often to pick up glitter, or it works really, really well on picking up stray embossing powder. Just kind of giving that a quick little there. Okay. I feel better about that now. I don't have powder sticking all over the place. Okay, embossing folders. There are lots on the market. Embossing folders have been around for quite a while. I'm sure you guys remember, you know, the old Darice Crafts had embossing folders, Cuttlebug, all that. So if you've got any of those in your stash, those are super fun to work with. I've got here the Altenew Beautiful Bergenia. I'm not sure how you say that. Embossing folder, and this is a 3D embossing folder. Okay, so what's the difference between a 3D folder and a regular folder? You just get more depth and dimension in a 3D folder. It's a little bit thicker than an actual, just a regular embossing folder. Is one better than the other? Just depends on the look that you're going for. But there are some kind of fun things you can do, I think, with the 3D ones, just because they are a little thicker, so a little deeper. You can do kind of some inking techniques. And we'll go over one of them here in a sec, but let me just show you. Depending on what type of die cut machine you have, that's what's going to determine the sandwich you use when you're embossing. Okay, so I'm just going to bring in my big shot here. Sorry, it's kind of not going to fit in the whole shot here. So if you've got the Platinum 6 with that universal platform, the Spellbinders machine, then I think that one's great. It kind of tells you everything you need to know on what layering sandwich you need to use, depending on what company the die that you're using is from. Okay, some are super thick. I have a Spellbinders one from way back when, and it's like really thick. It was like a double-sided embossing folder. So you're going to use a different sandwich depending on what company the embossing folder is from. Okay, I've just got a regular big shot here, and what I've found for using this, for me in my machine, the best sandwich for me is using the base plate, and then just the embossing folder, and then the clear plate. And I get a little bit of a deeper impression if I just add a piece of paper for a shim. Okay, so this is like a 5x7 envelope that was just kind of hanging around my craft room. So what you're going to want to do is give your paper a little bit of a mist with water. I usually do that on whatever will be the back side of my cardstock. Then I'm going to place that in the embossing folder. And what the water does is it just kind of softens up your paper to help stop any cracking from the embossing folder. Okay, so I've got my paper in. I find that for my machine, I don't need a bottom plate. I just use the base plate with both tabs closed, the folder, a clear plate, and then I just add that little shim and roll it on through. All right, and okay, and there is my 3D embossed image. Okay, now that's lovely as is. You can with this you can go over top of it with ink if you want. We can also ink. You can also ink your embossing folder itself, and then put your paper in. So I'm just going to I'm using Distress Oxide just because I have it handy beside me here. So, but you can use any dye ink, any pigment ink. So I'm just going to, I'm doing this over on the, I'm not sure which is the front or back of this folder. So I'm going to call this the front. This was one of the first 3D folders Altenew came out with, and they didn't put the name on the folder, but now they have the name on it. Okay. So I'm just going to go over that. Okay, and throw in a piece of cardstock here. Okay. And run that through my machine again. Okay. And so you'll have to experiment with your machine, depending on which one you have, on the embossing sandwich that you're going to use. You might need to add a shim. Okay. And that kind of slid a little bit, but you can see, okay, that's what that looks like. And then you could also ink this other side. Let's do the other side of this too, just so you can kind of see what that looks like. I can give you the comparison, because this would be our emboss side, so this is raised, but you can also use this back side, which would be the deboss side as well. So let's run a piece of paper through that by adding our ink onto the, I'm going to call it the back side. So we'll just rub some ink on there, and then we can compare. You can see the difference between those two techniques. And I'm going to put my paper here, because this is going to be the front of my paper this time. I'm going to pop that in, get my top plate and my shim, and run that through. I know it's a fun technique. I've seen so many fun ways to use that. All right. Okay, and so now here is, I'm just going to move this so we can take a look at both. So here's the deboss side, where we inked the deboss side. Okay, and then on the right is where we inked the side that was, I'm going to call it the flat side. Okay, so that's our emboss side and then our deboss side. And so there's a really fun technique. If you've seen that blackout technique, this is how you would do that blackout technique. You would then go back over this with, yeah, exactly, Cynthia. Lots of fun combinations. You could go back over that with black ink. Okay, so super fun. And I mean, this in itself is just beautiful. For white on white card, it's gorgeous with that. Okay, so that's the Altenew folder. Now Altenew has lots of different types of embossing folders. They've even got, and probably some of the other manufacturers do too. Lisa Horton does. She's got the embossing folder that then it'll emboss, and then you can get the coordinating stencil, so you can add ink in your raised areas with the stencil. Beautiful. So there's lots of different creative possibilities with that. Now, I just wanted to mention too, if you happen to have a, if you've got any Spellbinders folders, so the 3D folders, you are going to have a different sandwich than this one. Okay, so you're going to have to experiment with your machine to figure out which sandwich will work the best. Once I get it figured out, I just write it on a Post-it note and put it on the embossing folder so that I remember what my sandwich is. So I just wanted to show you as an example for the Altenew embossing folder. I used the folder, the paper, a clear plate, and then a shim. Okay, but for this Spellbinders 3D embossing folder, what I found is that I have to open up both tabs on my base plate. Okay, and that then if I add the Solo thin die adapter, I'm just going to mist my cardstock here with a little water. Okay, then my paper in the embossing folder, and then the clear plate on top. So it's a completely different sandwich for my machine with the Spellbinders 3D embossing folders. Okay, but hang on, I'm in a small area here. I'll roll that on through. Now you'll notice when I'm rolling this, and even with the Altenew folder too, I'm not struggling to roll it through. If you find that when you're playing around with your embossing sandwich that you're having trouble getting that moving through your machine, then your sandwich is probably too tight or too thick. Okay, so you need to kind of thin it out. You can end up cracking your embossing folders if your sandwich is not correct, if it's too tight. And there's that. These Spellbinders ones are beautiful. I'm sorry, I don't recall the name of this folder. I would tell you what it's called. Yeah, Jenny, yeah. Yeah, that's the safest way, is actually to use paper as shims, because it's easy just to adjust it. Okay, so that's with our embossing folders. However, most of us don't just have embossing folders. We've got other goodies too that we'd like to make some extra use of. You can also do this with a stencil. I didn't prepare a sample with that, so I can't really exactly show you what your sandwich would be, but I will show you using a press plate. Okay, if we've got those, this is a better press plate, so if you've got any of these or a hot foil plate, you can do this as well and get a little bit more use out of those items as well. So you can use this for more than just your better press or hot foiling. We can also create a beautiful textured background. All right, so for this one, I found that if I did my platform, that I also had to add my solo thin die adapter. And so I'll just show you the edge of that, if you can see. So it just adds a little bit of thickness. Yeah, perfect, Jennifer. Yeah, that universal system is awesome. And I think because I've invested in all these little bits and pieces of different, you know, like the thin die adapter and all that kind of stuff, I've decided I have to wear those out before I invest in something new. Okay, there's my tan mat. Now, we're using a metal plate here. So whether it's a better press plate, a die cut, or a hot foil plate, you're going to need to use one of these guys. So this is a tan embossing mat. I've seen them in black as well. These things are not very expensive, but they're super versatile, especially in being able to use your metal dies. Okay, so for my Big Shot, I've got my base plate, I've got my solo thin die adapter. Okay, I'm going to mist my cardstock again. Just give it a little mist. Now I'm going to lay that on top. Then I'm going to add my tan mat. And last, I'm going to add my clear plate. So I'm going to run that through. Don't worry, nothing's breaking. It's just the tan mat rolling through. All right, and this is the magic. So this is embossed with our better press plate. Okay. And again, if you wanted, you could use the deboss side, so I would call it, so you can see all the, yeah, it's beautiful. So you get just a gorgeous amount of texture there. Okay. And this cardstock I'm using is, I'm not even sure, it's like some cheap stuff in my stash, and it's holding up okay once I've missed it with a little bit of water. So if you're like me, that, you know, you bought that exact index Nina cardstock thinking it was solar white, and now you have a whole box you got to use up. This is a great way to use it up because you can't use it for anything else. Okay, so can we do the same thing with a die? We sure can. So I've got just a cover die here, but if you've got, you know, if you've got, let's say, leaf dies, something small, you want to create a background out of those, you could definitely do that. And this one, it's the exact same sandwich. Okay, so I've got, just move this out of the way. I just want to show you this because this is such a great way to just maximize your products, especially these ones that are a little bit of a higher price point when we invest in them. Okay, so I've misted. Now I'm going to put my mat over top. Yeah, when you invest in these things, You know, you want to be able to get a little bit more use out of them. So I'm going to run that through. All right. So for example, here's so the cutting side of the die faces up into the tan mat. Now I suppose you could kind of run it through like this, right? And then your clear plate over top, that would work as well, as long as you have your, actually it'd have to be this way. No, you couldn't do it that way. That wouldn't work. Yeah, so I'm layering it from the bottom up, and then your cutting side or your impressed, the side that's going to leave an impression is always facing up, and then your cardstock on top. Okay, and in between is your, yeah, does that make sense? Let me look at my notes. Misted cardstock, yeah, tan mat, your tan mat then. Okay, so you can see you've got lots of options here. So now you've just expanded your embossing folders by a multiple of 10, depending on how many press plates. And you can do this with hot foil plates as well. Okay, yeah, super fun. So that's what I call dry embossing. So give that a try. And if you don't have these mats at all, I don't even know how much they cost. They can't be very expensive. I don't think they cost very much. But I want to just quickly show you just a few samples of just kind of some finished projects using embossing. All right. Okay, so this is an embossing folder, and this is one of the embossing folders that actually had a coloring stencil that you can purchase separately. So you can see you can kind of really emphasize the dimension and add some color to your images. This is another embossing folder, and for this one, I just took my ink pad and swiped it over top of the raised areas, a gold ink pad. All right. And now this is just cardstock that's painted with lunar paste and then just run through an embossing folder. All right. And now here we've got, this is embossed, and then we've just added a bit of lunar paste onto the raised areas. Okay, the sentiment is heat embossed. And then this little spatter of gold is just some gold embossing powder that's just dropped onto the paper and then heated from the backside. And so if you wanted to kind of, you know, make it look like you're adding some spatters, this is a great way to do that. And you don't have to use embossing ink. It will just melt as long as you heat it from the backside. All right, now here we've got kind of two kinds of heat emboss, or pardon me, dry embossing. So we've got a panel back here that's been, ink has been added to the raised areas, and then we've got this panel here where the embossing folder itself has been inked. And then the run through the Big Shot. Okay, and then here's another one where the embossing folder has been inked, and you can see depending on what side of the folder you inked, we've got the gold ink right in the grooves of this particular folder. Okay. And then lastly, I wanted to show, because I forgot to mention this with heat embossing. Here I've just stamped a large floral image and heat embossed it with white embossing powder, and then just gone over and I'm not really sure how I did that. I think I just used watercolor paint. So just kind of drop that in after. But heat embossing an image is a great way if you want to practice your watercoloring. You can stamp your image. I'll show you this one here. You can stamp an image, and this is stamped in white embossing ink, and then when you go ahead and watercolor that, your colors will stay within their little embossed areas. So if that's something you want to try doing, working on your watercoloring practice, that's a great way to do it as well. So yeah, that is all I could think of at the time for embossing. So hopefully, if you might have picked up on a new tip or something like that. But yeah, if you've got any of these supplies, different embossing powders, embossing glazes, play around with them. And be awesome to share whatever you create in the paper crafting group. We would love to see your projects there. Sorry. So yeah, if you're not a member there yet, then consider joining. We'd love to have you there. Oh, you're very welcome, Jenny. Okay, Carla will be back next week. And if you missed Sandy's live earlier, you can go back and watch the replay. She's gave us a really great close-up look at the new 49 in Market that's in the shop, some beautiful stuff. And then there's some information about some fabulous Spellbinders products coming, and the Spellbinders Crafty Retreat weekend that's coming up as well. So check that out. And yeah, thanks for hanging out with me today, and thanks for spending part of your Thursday afternoon with me, everyone. You're welcome, everybody. Have a great day and a wonderful weekend wherever you are. Take care. Bye.